Welcome back to the MBC Sports Podcast. Andrew Selliver, Connell Scruggs, JP Eisenhower, and Andrew Feeney back with you to preview Marist versus Perry in the quarterfinals taking place tomorrow evening, 7:30 from the Panther Pit down in Perry, Georgia. Both teams won seeds. Ultimately, it came down to a coin toss. Marist lost this coin toss, so they'll have to travel the 2+ hour trip down to Perry, Georgia, down past Macon, around the Warner Robins area, an area filled with very talented football teams, including Peach County, Perry, Warner Robins. Perry, a team that's won their first region title since 1959, their second ever in school history, looking, I believe, to go back to the semifinals for the second time ever in school history, only in their fifth quarterfinal appearance in school history. So a team that's really setting new records in school history, going up against a perennial powerhouse in Marist. And it kind of reminds me of last year's quarterfinal matchup between Oconee County and Marist. Oconee County, a team that really was setting new records. They made it to the state championship for one of their first times in school history, and they upset Marist 17-7 this week. An interesting matchup that we'll get to in a second. First off, Connell, I'll go to you. Last week, Marist takes down Flowery Branch 24-0 in a top 5 matchup in the second round. What a just overall impressive performance out of the War Eagles.
Absolutely. And main thing for me was that defense. I mean, we talked about coming into that game, this was going to be the toughest test through the air that Marist had seen all season, and we just absolutely locked that down. Only 168 total yards throughout the game versus a Flowery Branch team that averages over 400 yards per game on offense, and held the Falcons to just 108 yards through the air. And I think a big part of that is the pressure that the linebackers and the defensive line are creating, and they're getting on the quarterback. Marist's quarterback pressure percentage, which is it's counted on drop back. So the amount of times the quarterback does a drop back, 81% of the time getting a pressure. You can credit that to our stat man, JP Eisenhower, for getting that stat. But that's just a ridiculous number. 4 out of 5 times you drop back, you're going to have pressure on you. And it's hard for a high school quarterback to make good throws, good solid throws down the field when you're getting pressure in your face. And then also the offense struggled a little bit in the first half. The Flowery Branch defense proved to be a little bit tougher than we expected going into that game, but in the second half just took care of business. 132 yards, 117 on the ground. Really solid overall performance by the offense. Just had that one fumble by Ian Otten. But other than that, actually, correction.
Champ Davis, actually, with the fumble.
Yeah, Champ Davis, sorry.
On the quarterback keeper. Ian Otten fumbled
right
the week before.
Week versus Central. Anyways, just a solid game all around. We've seen Marist continue to do this throughout the playoffs and throughout the whole year. Really haven't shown that many weaknesses throughout the game. Any point in the game where you've been like, man, this is getting a little out of hand, or they might have some trouble. I haven't seen any of that so far from Marist in the playoffs or throughout the season.
Well, I think also one thing to watch for, you mentioned all those quarterback pressures out of a passer in Renard. This week also facing a guy that can throw the ball around. We'll talk about Perry in a second with UJP, but one thing I did notice, Renard did a very good job of escaping the pocket, and he did pick up a few yards with his legs after escaping the pocket. That's one thing for the Marist defense to look out for, is they're getting all this pressure on the quarterback. They either need to complete that with a sack in the backfield or just keep an eye on the quarterback, make sure. I mean, I remember my head goes back to one specific play in the fourth quarter on, I think, 4th and 12, where Marist got 3 guys in the backfield but ended up giving up 14 yards on a quarterback escape. So that's one thing to watch for. But going up against Perry offense, and they're led by their quarterback, Lane, I believe. So he's more of a pocket passer than Renard, I think. Lane Rucker, yeah. I think he doesn't have as good of legs, but JP, what do you see in this matchup this week between Marist and Perry?
Yeah, well, I would definitely agree with you. Lane Rucker is not a dual threat quarterback. He has just 12 carries for 15 yards on the season. He's not someone who's going to beat you with your legs, which will definitely play into this Marist defense and the pressure they get on quarterbacks. They've been beat with dual threat quarterbacks throughout the season, but that definitely takes an aspect out of the offense that the defense has to worry about. On the season, he's struggled with turnovers. When you look at his numbers, he has 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and 3 fumbles, so 13 touchdowns to 12 turnovers. that has to be something you're worried about going into a game against a potent Marist defense. He's really great on quick throws. He can't throw on the run. He's inaccurate on deep balls. But when he gets the ball out of his hand quickly, that's when he's best. He really cannot deal with pressure. And I think that really comes with an offensive line that has struggled. But really what they're going to look for is Mikhail Kendrick. He's really their entire offense. I mean, when you look at it, he has 1,100 yards on the season. He has 19 receptions for 166. And then they only have 2 other players with above 80 yards rushing. And they're both receivers. And they're both coming out of the wildcat position mainly. He does great on cuts. He does most of his work outside off tackles. And he's not really someone who's going to run in the middle, but he really has been their entire offense this year.
We did see Marist going up against a team in Central 2 weeks ago, and they were led by Narada Levet, who had just a tremendous year, and Marist shut him down to under 100 yards rushing, and he was averaging maybe, 1 or 2 yards a carry when he was averaging 7.5 yards a carry on the season. So I think that Lane Rucker is going to have a heck of a game, because I think Perry is going to have to go to the air if they want to find success. I just don't see them being able to run the ball with Mikhail Kendrick, despite the fact that he's had a tremendous year.
Right. No team so far against Marist has been able to establish any sort of a run game. And so we say this, I feel like, week after week. The quarterback for the opposing team has to have a heck of a game in order for the opposing team to be competitive, because you have to get it done through the air. That's pretty much your only option with a front seven, with how the front seven's looking like for Marist this year. And it's not like the secondary is a weak spot at all. They're extremely talented too, but that seems to be the weaker of the two options right now.
Yeah.
I think from an offensive line standpoint too, the offensive line for opposing teams going up against Marist, they better be hitting the film room a lot, and they better be preparing a lot for just all the different looks that Marist will give them, because that defensive front seven for the War Eagles has been so dynamic, and they're so quick. We saw that against Stevenson. Stevenson had a good offensive line that was big. They just weren't fast enough, and the Marist agility up front just caught up to him and ultimately just demolished him in the backfield.
Yeah, then outside of Kendrick, it's really been Quan Wright, the receiver. He's 6'4". He's really the player that they like to target in the red zone. He has 6 touchdowns that leads all receivers. It actually, if you look at the touchdowns from the second and third receiver combined, it equals his 6 receiving touchdowns. He's the receiver that you'll see mainly running out of the wildcat position.
And going back to what you were saying about the offensive line, this Perry offensive line is a little bit bigger than you would say average. So like you said, they're really going to have to prepare for these different looks and blitzes that Marist brings, because that's kind of been the main source of the pressure, other than the just pure defensive line talent, has been the wild looks that Marist gives with the linebackers blitzing some, pulling some off the defensive end and into coverage while blitzing on the other side. It's just a whole host of things you have to prepare for as an offensive line, and it's just hard as a high school team that isn't polished and hasn't really seen that many looks from guys with the talent and physicality that Marist has. It's hard to compete with that and give your quarterback enough time to make good throws.
We talk about this week on the road at Perry. Marist, a team that is 9-0 on the season. They've played 7 of those 9 games at home. That having to do with their 2 cancellations of games in Druid Hills and Chapel Hill were road games that didn't happen. And then the Mays regular season game got moved to home. Marist ended up playing more games than normal in the regular season at home, despite only playing 8 games, 6 at home, 2 on the road. And then the first 2 weeks of the playoffs at home, 2-hour plus drive as well. They haven't had to make any of those long drives that we've seen in years past up to West Hall and those sorts of schools, White County, to play region games. How do you think that affects the team this week? Not only being on the road, but having to drive at least twice as far as their farthest away game that was at Woodward.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be a really interesting experience. Obviously, don't have a lot of experience going away so far this year. Double the length, as you said, from the farthest distance that we've traveled, but overall, I think it's a football town, and really, it's probably going to be the biggest visiting crowd at least, that we've seen all year. I think last week was probably the biggest general crowd that we've had in a very long time, but yeah, definitely the biggest visiting crowd that we've seen all year. But I think all in all, Coach Chadwick's definitely going to have him prepared for it.
Yeah, I think that's just something that adds to the preparation for this week. I think Coach Chadwick, with his experience, knows what he's doing. I think they'll be ready to play. Last week, I think that might have taken an effect on the performance at Oconee County. They certainly didn't play their best game in that game, and it might have had an effect that it was day after Thanksgiving and an hour-plus bus ride, but I think they're not going to make that mistake again this week. I think they'll come fully prepared to take on Perry. As we take a look at some other big-time games, we've reached the quarterfinals in all classifications this week. That means some very big matchups because you finally see 1 seeds and 1 seeds matching up, and coin tosses determining the home seed. A lot of these games, surprisingly, we're seeing massive amounts of travel in. We'll start with our first game, Cedartown and Bainbridge, the one we'll pick. We'll remind you of the standings after last week. I'm still in first, 58, JP 49, Connell 47, and Feeney 44. 2 upset picks correct last week, though, and Feeney hit and I hit. That's our best upset performance we've had in a single week this year. But Cedartown and Bainbridge, this, I think, we came into the playoffs thinking quarterfinal matchups, the one everybody will want to keep their eyes on, certainly going to be Jefferson, Carver, Columbus. Now it's based on these Carver Columbus performances of late, it's looking less and less like that. I think the one to keep your eye on this week, Cedartown and Bainbridge. If Marist wins, they would end up playing on the road at one of these, the winner of this game, because the coin toss Marist already lost. Bainbridge 4+ hours away, Cedartown more like 90 minutes. Cedartown, a team that has been very hot of late. If you take a look at their schedule, they did lose 2 games to start the season. They're 8-2, but they lost their first 2. They lost to a Rockmart team from 3A that just lost by 3 to the number 1 ranked Cedar Grove Saints down there in 3A, and they lost to Calhoun 14-7. Calhoun, a team that's still in the quarterfinals up in 5A, that played in basically the region of death up there with Cartersville and Blessed Trinity, and took BT to the brink. Then they just got on a roll. They played some region games. Their region was very weak, and they blew everybody out. They did play Central, a team Marist faced. They beat them 34-7. They did not play in the first week because Arabian Mountain had to forfeit. That's one thing to keep your eye on. Does that help them because they got an extra week of rest? Does it hurt them maybe taking a week off there? And then they absolutely annihilated North Oconee last week, 56-0. That was an impressive performance. Taking on Bainbridge this week. Bainbridge, a team that, similar to Cedartown, they started off pretty slow as well. They lost 3 of their first 4, but also to very elite competition in Coffee, Valdosta, Ware County, teams from 5 and 6A that are all still in the playoffs as well. I mean, those are games that Valdosta, you kind of expected them to lose, and they lost pretty handily, 45-7. But Ware County and Coffee, they were in both of those games with a lead, actually. So Bainbridge, another team that's competed well, and they've also gotten on a roll. It's kind of just both teams are hot, but one of them has to lose this week. One thing to keep your eye on for Bainbridge, Dayon Bowie, their star athlete that's a 5-star committed to Georgia recently, has not played a game yet this season, and I believe he will not be playing. He had an ACL and MCL injury in the preseason, so I don't believe he'll be playing this week or for the remainder of the playoffs. But both teams plenty of experience. It's kind of take your pick in this one. I think pretty even matchup. I'm going to go with Cedartown in this one. I think they've been very hot, and that defense has been very impressive. They keep the ball on the ground. That might be good for this December cold football, averaging over 270 yards on the ground. Harlem Diamond averaging 7.5 yards per carry. They run that triple option, and then they have their star linebacker. And actually, he plays on the offensive side of the ball as well in C.J. Washington. I think they pull, I guess you would say, a little bit of an upset here, but I think it's kind of a pick-em matchup here in Cedartown and Bainbridge.
I'm going to go with Bainbridge here. Cedartown's only played 1 game so far in the playoffs, like you said, and they won 56-0. That looks good on paper, right? Then you look, North Oconee, they're actually a 3 seed, and they are under 500 this season. So when you put that in context, it's not really that much of an impressive win over North Oconee. And then you look at Bainbridge, who has not scored less than 42 points in the playoffs so far, blanking Westside Macon 42-0, and blanking Islands, who actually was who peeped into the 4A top 10 a little bit earlier in the later in the season, beat them 43-0. So, but the big thing in this game, neither team has allowed a point in the playoffs so far. Like you said, they're both hot. But I think Bainbridge is going to get it done here. Cedartown, they've been very limited to the ground on offense. And if somebody shuts that down, they don't really have another avenue to go offensively. They have a really good defense. Like you were saying, they got CJ Washington, 4-star, Jaden Johnson, 3-star safety. But I think Bainbridge is the better team here, face better competition. I think they're going to get it done.
Bainbridge also a 3-year starting quarterback in Quade Hawkins, so who ended up winning them a state championship back in 2018. So they might have a little more experience than this Bainbridge squad.
Yeah, I think I think back in, I think it was either week 4 or week 3 of the podcast, real early in the season, I picked Bainbridge to win a game. I watched a lot of their film. I really like this Bainbridge team. I've been high on them ever since they won the game that I picked them. No reason to change now. I'm going Bainbridge.
I want Cedartown to win because I don't want to have to drive, was it like 4 or 5 hours? But I can't pick against Bainbridge because I think they're the better team, and I just can't pick against this offense because I don't think Cedartown can put up enough points to where they'd be able to beat Bainbridge. But if Cedartown wins, Sella will buy the entire Cedartown football team dinner.
Yeah, that won't be happening, JP. I can tell you that much. But I think it's similar to last week, and then some of us picked against a team, but we're all cheering for Cedartown. And we were all cheering for LaGrange last week. That didn't get us anywhere. It got us with a matchup against Perry, who really blew out LaGrange 34-4. All 4 of those points came on safeties on punts from Perry. That's one thing to keep your eye on, is the long snapping this week out of Perry. But a couple other games to mention here in the quarterfinals. A lot of them in 5A, some big time matchups up in 5A. We'll start with the one I mentioned earlier in 4A, JP, Jefferson and Carver. I guess you would say that's your other one to keep an eye on. That's a top 5 matchup again in 4A, but Carver has looked a little down recently.
Yeah, Carver's offense has looked a lot worse in the playoffs. They're definitely taking a step back, but their defense has taken a step up as their offense took a step back. And when you look at their defense, they've played well all season, but they've really stepped up in the playoffs. But when you look at this Jefferson offense with Malachi Starks, he's an athlete. I mean, the 5-star committed to Georgia. He's averaging a first time every time he carries the ball. I don't see them being able to stop this Jefferson offense. I mean, this Jefferson offense, they've just been able to completely dominate teams all season.
Yeah, and then let's go up to 5A here. Cartersville and Ware County. That's a matchup of 2 seeds up there. I believe it's at Ware County. Ware County, that's going to be a long drive for Cartersville all the way down to Ware County. But those teams both really, I mean, they're really 1 seeds. They just got stuck in tough regions. Ware County losing by 3 to Warner Robins. Cartersville didn't even lose a game in the region. They just had one forfeited to BT basically on coronavirus issues. But then those other 2 teams match up as well in Warner Robins and Blessed Trinity. I think the winner of those 2 matchups, you'll see in the winners of those matchups playing in the state championship. Connell, let's head to you. Maybe the game of the week in the whole state in Warner Robins versus Blessed Trinity. The number 1 versus number 2 ranked teams up in 5A.
Yeah, anytime you hear Blessed Trinity in the playoffs, you know they're going to perform. This team was ridiculous in 4A. Let's just say that. They dominated in their time in 4A. They're currently 8-0, and since last year, they picked up a quarterback, J.C. French, who has really helped complete this team, kind of, who already had a dominant rushing attack in the form of Justice Haynes, who averages 11 yards per carry and has not had a game this season where he's rushed for less than 100 yards. It's really just the potency on offense, and Blessed Trinity is an extremely physical team on defense. Coach Tim McFarland does a great job with them. He's experienced in the playoffs, and you look at Warner Robins, an extremely talented team. They've played a lot of good competition this year. They technically beat Valdosta this year, but not really. They lost the game in regulation, and then it went back to their win column out of the loss column because Valdosta was forced to forfeit that game due to playing an ineligible player who is Jake Garcia, who was a USC commit. And then they also played Ware County and beat them 22-19, which is kind of their marquee win of this season. So I agree with you. I think Warner Robins, Blessed Trinity, probably the two best teams in 5A. I got Blessed Trinity coming out of that matchup, even though we're not picking this game.
Yeah, I kind of like that too. Warner Robins did not look amazing last week against Woodward. A lot closer than a lot of people expected. Honestly, closer than the Marist Woodward matchup from earlier this season. But both teams, I mean, perennial powerhouses. And Warner Robins, that's an interesting scenario with that Valdosta game. But even though they did technically win, they lost, but they only lost by 3. So they were pretty evenly matched with a more talented then than now Valdosta team. Couple other ones we'll mention. Coffee, Calhoun, another one. I mean, you look at these matchups, that's a 3 versus 3 seed matchup. And those are the 3 seeds out of those 2 regions. In 3 of the 4 quadrants up in 5A, we're seeing matchups between teams out of the same 2 regions, the regions of death, as we like to call them, with Coffee and Ware County and Warner Robins all in one region, Blessed Trinity, Calhoun, Cartersville all in another. So it's unreal what's going on up there. That'll be one to watch. And then down in single A private, also could consider this one the game of the week. Feeney, Elka, Prince Avenue, 2 storied programs down in single A private. What a matchup we got, and technically a big time rematch.
You know, it's a really interesting game because Prince Avenue has had a great regular season. Elka, iffy, still good, just not as great as we're used to. Elka has won 5 straight state championships, and they played last year. I don't remember which round was it, semifinals, quarterfinals. Elka won 62-57. That's pretty high scoring. I don't think it'll be this high. This high scoring.
Pretty
this
high
year.
scoring.
A little bit, just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I think we're not picking, but I think Elka overall, just because of their greatness in the playoffs, I think that Elka will win this game.
Brock Vandegrift looking to get one more shot at Elka in the playoffs before he departs for Georgia. Looking to bring a state championship home to Prince Avenue instead of Eagles Landing, which would be the first time in 6 years. But definitely one to watch as well. We'll keep eyes on all of those games tomorrow night with live look-ins throughout our broadcast, but we'll head to college football now. Couple games to take a look at. Let's start off with the Army-Navy game, JP.
Well, the Army-Navy game is a great game every single year. It's always going to be a closer game than expected. The Army's coming off a huge 28-27 win over Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern's a lot better team this year than they have been in years past. Army's 7-2 this year. They're averaging 346 yards per game, and Navy's giving up 410 yards per game. They're scoring 30.6 points per game while only giving up 16.3, and they're averaging almost 300 rushing yards per game. I'm taking Army in this one. Go Army, beat Navy.
Go Navy, beat Army, JP. Navy just with a lot harder strength of schedule, in my opinion. They've faced a lot better opponents than Army has, and I think they're much better tested than this Army team, despite the fact that Army's got a much better record. A lot of that can go on the schedule here, and Navy's been playing teams like the BYUs of the world. They played Memphis. They played Tulsa. They lost to Memphis by 3. That's pretty impressive, despite losing that game. They kept Tulsa within their reach. Stayed close with SMU for a while. BYU was a blowout, but there's all sorts of stories about not practicing before that game, with it being the first game of the season. All of their games, for the most part, I know they're like 3-6, I believe, but they've all been pretty close games this year, so I got to go with Navy.
I'm going to go with Army here. I love this game. Two of the branches of our militaries competing against each other in football. One of the most exciting games. I'm still going to go with Army. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
I love this game. It's always a 50-50. Like, it's just who wants it more. I've always been a big Navy guy just because of Navy's usual. I think they've played Notre Dame for like 100 straight years, before this year.
It was going to be in Ireland this year, right?
Yeah, it was going to be in Ireland to start the year. And I love Navy. I feel like they exactly what you said, Solo. They have a better strength of schedule. Army has not played a lot of people, and I think they're I think Navy's going to pull this one out.
It's kind of reminds me of Marist versus St. Pius in that a lot of times it's not the team that you expect to win that wins. We saw that for like the past, other than last year, for like 4 years previous, it was almost always the team that was not favored that won the Marist Pius game. You see that a lot in this game, Army-Navy, always close, as you guys said. Let's move on to an ACC matchup, top 25 matchup, Feeney and UNC versus Miami. Pretty much competing for like the number 3 seed out of the ACC this year.
Yeah. Realistically, we're not picking teams. We're picking which quarterback is going to win this game. Derek King versus Sam Howell. It's just both defenses are just like average 1 or 2 playmakers on each side. So, for example, like North Carolina has Chaz Surratt, and then Miami has I forgot his name, but the edge rusher is really good. I think realistically, it's going to be a shootout. I think anytime either team has played a good offense, they've allowed over 500 yards. So it's a really close one, but I think North Carolina's strength of schedule is a little bit better than Miami, so I'm gonna go with North Carolina in this one.
Yeah, I like that pick. Miami played Clemson, but that wasn't really much of a football game after the first quarter. North Carolina, they're pretty well tested. Miami's been very close against some teams like Virginia and Virginia Tech and NC State. I think North Carolina, just despite some issues on the defensive side of the ball, I think they pull away.
And North Carolina, they scored 3 times against Notre Dame. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, they might have the best offense in the ACC.
Yeah.
I am also going to go with North Carolina, although I think it's going to be a really close game. We talk about kind of each team being tested. Miami's played a lot of close games this season, but so has UNC. They only beat Wake Forest by 6. They lost to Virginia, and they lost to Florida State. So that's kind of all I have. That's how I'm going to end it there. But even with that, I don't really want to pick Miami here. Something's telling me I shouldn't pick Miami. I hope my gut is right. It probably will be wrong. But
it was
anyways,
the first week of the season when Miami shocked the world and beat Louisville.
Yeah, we all picked Louisville here.
Louisville's a good team this year.
They gave Notre Dame.
They didn't lose to Georgia Tech by 20.
Yeah.
Something's telling me not to pick Miami, so I'm not going to listen to it, and I'm going to pick Miami just because you mentioned they were close. Miami was close against Virginia. UNC lost to Virginia. When you look at it, Miami, they've played close games, but they're still winning. The one game against Clemson, it's Clemson. So I get why they'd lose that game. But UNC, they're just losing. They're losing games that they shouldn't be losing. And I feel like this is one where you feel like UNC should win this. And just because you feel like they should win this, I feel like they're going to lose this one. So I'm going to pick Miami in this.
Yeah, let's go to upset picks real quick this week. I wanted the Ole Miss upset over Texas A&M this week.
Who didn't? Come on. Who didn't want that one?
But it did get canceled, unfortunately, for the group of 5 teams.
Rip in the chat.
So I'm going to go with Minnesota over Nebraska. Honestly, a little bit surprised this game was a over a 10-point underdog pick for Minnesota. Both teams are not having the best of years. We expected Minnesota. At the beginning of the season, Minnesota would have been favored in this one, but they kind of got blown out by some teams, including Iowa and Michigan. They did play Purdue. I'm not going to say they won that game because they really did not deserve to win that game, but they won that game by 3 points. So they're coming off a win and then a week off because was it Ohio State they were supposed to play got canceled? No, it was they did get a game canceled. Anyway, they're coming off a win and then a bye week. Nebraska coming off also a win over Purdue. So that was an upset pick for JP, right?
Yep, I picked Rutgers over Purdue for that one.
Rutgers. So both teams coming off wins. I'm just going to go Minnesota Big Ten's kind of been a site of a lot of underdog wins this season.
I'm going to go with one of my specialties here. Some random game. I'm going to go UTEP over North Texas. This is a 10-point spread here. I had UTEP upsetting another team. I can't remember who it was earlier this season, and they actually covered. So maybe this time they'll actually complete the job and win the game. But we'll see. I don't know. You can never guess what's going to happen in these kind of weird games.
You watch film on those teams yet?
Absolutely not. Cannot name one player on either team. But nonetheless, I'm picking it.
UTEP let me down earlier this season. I picked them for an upset and they didn't pull through. I think it was UTEP over Charlotte. Didn't come through for me. I'm gonna go. I think that one thing we've learned in the past 2 years, JP, whenever he picks Mizzou, it doesn't work. Like they lose every time, every single time. But we're gonna change the momentum. All right, somebody different's gonna pick Mizzou. I'm gonna take Mizzou over Georgia, baby. I think I'm bold statement. Even if they don't win, I think they cover. I think they cover the spread.
JP's got to be pretty pleased with that.
I mean, Aaron Murray called Connor Bazelak the best quarterback in the SEC. So
get out of here.
I'm just
Get
saying.
out of here.
All right, did he actually say that?
I believe it was
man.
someone.
I hope
gotta
he
find
didn't say that for the sake of his job.
Wait, I gotta find the statement.
All right, I hope he didn't say that.
I gotta find the statement.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
That's not good for him.
I mean, let's just quickly list off all the better quarterbacks than Bazelak in the SEC. All right, we
Jones,
got Trask,
Yeah,
Jones.
Aaron Murray, Connor Bazelak is the best quarterback in the SEC.
My word. All right, go ahead, JP. You're upset.
I'm not gonna say he's wrong. I think Connor Bazelak in the future could be. I don't think he is now, but I definitely like that for a future reference.
I mean,
but
come
not,
on, Corral.
not in the present.
Corral is better than
Corral's
that.
not better.
I would
Yes, he
take.
is.
I would
Corral.
not take Corral.
I would take Corral and their backup. I would love
Yeah.
Rice Plumlee over him.
All right, but I'm gonna take a page out of Connell's book and pick two random teams. I'm gonna pick Central Michigan over Toledo. Actually, unlike Connell, I actually did look into them a little bit. They have the same record, and when you look at the teams they've played, the common opponents, they have very similar scores and very similar margins of victory and loss. So I don't know how this game's an 11-point spread. So I'm gonna pick Central Michigan to beat Toledo.
Any players on those teams either?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right. Discussion this week. Let's talk a little more playoffs. But first, let's talk about this Ohio State and Big Ten situation. Obviously, the Big Ten, there were options out there if the Big Ten wanted to break their rules and how they could break the rules to get this situation off their hands. One of the ways that they could have fixed this without breaking the rules was just to schedule them a different game in the Big Ten, move around schedules. That didn't happen. They could have broken the rules as to letting them play a game outside the Big Ten. Cincinnati, Texas A&M, those games were all mentioned. That didn't happen. Instead, they decided just to let the 6-game rule go down to 5 games. Your opinions on this, guys? I mean, would that have happened if it was anybody other than Ohio State in the Big Ten?
No, and that's my problem with it. I can see exactly why they did this as a conference. You need money
They want
because
the
we're in
rep.
COVID right now. You need it, and for that to happen, you're going to need a team to make the playoff. And Ohio State is their pretty much, it's their most legitimate team to make the playoff, and I think by far the best team in the Big Ten. So of course they're going to do this. It makes sense from a business perspective as a conference. However, looking at it from a fan's perspective,
Hate it.
I don't like it because I think if you switch it, JP made this point earlier, you got Indiana's record and Ohio State's record, you flip the team. So Indiana's 5-0 right now, and Ohio State has Indiana's record. I don't think it's happening. I don't think they lower the minimum game requirement. I just don't think that happens.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Connell. It's like, it's just disappointing. Like they could have done so much. There's so many different teams outside the Big Ten they could have scheduled. There were other teams they could have moved schedules around. And it's literally just because they know that if they let them just do the 5 games and then the Big Ten championship, then they have the best chance of getting into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, when you put any other team, if you were to have any other team go above Ohio State would be put in over them if that team above them doesn't meet the game requirement. No other team would get this kind of treatment, and that's what bothers me, is that I don't think any other team but Ohio State would get this treatment. I don't even think Michigan would get this treatment.
My opinion further on that I do think Ohio State is one of the best 4 teams in the country. So if we're looking at it from a playoff perspective and trying to get the best 4 teams, if you're just looking at it from that criteria, best 4 teams in the country in the playoff, you're probably pretty happy with this this rule being changed, because I think Ohio State is definitely one of the best 4 teams in the country.
Yeah, and I understand that games are getting canceled because of COVID, and you're saying that it's because, it's just a different year. But why not let them reschedule a different game then? Why not let them go outside the conference? Why not let them do other things that doesn't involve changing the rules for them?
Do you think they would have played Cincinnati if Cincinnati?
No, they
won
wouldn't. If they would have continued to push for the rules to be changed, I don't think they would try to play another game, because I don't think they would want to play Cincinnati or Texas A&M and risk another loss.
I wish they would have played Texas A&M. I think they would have beat the crap out of Texas A&M, but I wish they would have played them
so
we
could
know.
eliminate Texas A&M.
Well, and that would have given the Power Five, the Group of 5 teams, at least an option here, because
they don't have a chance.
Well, no,
they're never gonna.
Here's the scenario, JP. Notre Dame beats Clemson, which I think that's at 50-50 right now.
I think it is too.
Bama beats Florida, which seems like a growing possibility given the way Florida's playing right now. And then Ohio State wins out, which seems like a pretty good possibility. That's 3 teams in right now. You've eliminated Clemson. You've eliminated Florida. If Ohio State beat Texas A&M, you've eliminated the Texas A&M. They would have to go to Cincinnati if they wanted to put a next team.
They would literally put a 2-loss Iowa State in over
If they did that,
disrespect.
my
JP,
God.
it would be Oklahoma, I think. But
They
would they
would-
put
yeah.
Oklahoma in?
No,
over
they would.
Cincinnati?
Oklahoma
they
behind
put-
Iowa State because
No, but Oklahoma's going to beat
here's the thing.
Iowa State. in the
They
championship.
will never put a non-Power 5 team in the playoffs until the playoff format has changed. I don't think a non-Power 5 team is ever going to be able to make it in the current format. And anyone who thinks that they're playing these insane scenarios where everything has to go wrong for every Power 5 team, and they have to go undefeated and just get completely lucky.
And in that, and I like exactly what you're saying there, because it's totally true. And I was listening last night, and Joel Klatt, actually, genius analyst. We all love him. Big fans of Joel Klatt here.
Fan.
He brought up a good point. He's like, looking at the scenario right now and the treatment in the past of BYU, and right now actually of Cincinnati. Cincinnati's more of the case because they seem like a more solid team than BYU, and they've absolutely proven it. They honestly might in the future have to separate the Power 5 and the Group of 5 into 2 separate divisions and have 2 separate national championships, because at this point, if you're a Power 5 team, you have like no hope of making the playoff. I mean, like you said, it has to be a nuclear disaster situation for all the Power 5 teams for them to even consider putting a Group of 5 team in there. And I think that honestly wouldn't be a bad idea, because then you got Power 5 teams, they're really on a different level of competition than the Group of 5 as a whole. And then you have the Group of 5 competing for their own national championship, which might drive up a little bit of recruiting in that case for them, because then you have at least a legitimate chance to compete for a national championship. And those programs could eventually grow. So I think that might be the best option going into the future.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about a different scenario here. I think these are the 2 most interesting scenarios. That one, I think it's still a possibility, but
slim.
I think Texas A&M now has a decent shot at it. But I think it's not out of the realm of possibility to believe Bama beats Florida, Ohio State wins out, and Notre Dame beats Clemson. I think the first 2, Bama beating Florida and Ohio State winning out, are definitely like favored right now.
Yep.
Notre Dame, Clemson's kind of a toss-up. But it's not out of the realm of possibility to see that happen. The only thing was they needed Texas A&M to lose. I think personally, JP, I think if that happened, they'd put Cincinnati in if Cincinnati won out. Now, I think Texas A&M probably would get in over Cincinnati. My thing would be, in that scenario, they're gonna just end up with Bama playing Texas A&M again, and we all know how that's gonna end.
That's my point.
So,
I feel like we know that Texas A&M is not a playoff team.
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Texas A&M gets in over Cincinnati, because Cincinnati,
I think it is.
Cincinnati still has to play Tulsa, who's a ranked team, and they would also
that game got canceled though.
No, it got postponed.
Oh, got postponed.
They would also be a conference champion, which that's somewhat of a big deal apparently. Let's go to the other scenario in that Clemson wins and Florida wins and Ohio State wins out, that's I think that's a nightmare for the.
Well, here's what's gonna happen with
committee.
that. The committee's gonna choose between Alabama and Notre Dame. They're gonna choose Alabama because of name brand. I think Notre Dame's played.
I don't think because of name brand. It would
I think,
probably
well,
be
it's
like
gonna be
based on their schedule.
They
strength.
played. It's also gonna be based on offense. I think their offense has
Yeah.
played so much better. I think Notre Dame, though, with the season they've had, I would like to see Notre Dame just because when you look at it, they've beat Clemson and that's their only loss. So their one loss is also a team they've already beaten.
Well, and if they let Notre Dame in, then you would have to worry about who you put at 1. Which hold on, would you put Clemson or Florida at 1? Because if you put Clemson at 1, then I think it's 100% Alabama would get the 4 spot just because they don't want to see Clemson versus Notre Dame for the third time.
Well, keep in mind, Clemson and Florida. I mean, right now Clemson is ahead of Ohio State, and if Notre Dame loses to Clemson and Ohio State wins out, what's to say Notre Dame shouldn't be ahead of Ohio State too? Because Clemson right now has the 1 loss to Notre Dame, and they're ahead of Ohio State. So why, if Notre Dame ends up with 1 loss and it's to Clemson, should they not be ahead of Ohio State?
If it's a one possession game, then all that happens is Notre Dame and Clemson flip, and you get another. But you would get the third rematch. But nobody would want to see that, so that's why I would think they would put Ohio State at 3.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to get to. Is I think they're gonna choose. I think they're gonna choose between Alabama and Notre Dame, but I want Ohio State to be out in that scenario.
I think Ohio State will be out. Actually, I don't think the committee will be able to choose between those two, and then they'll realize, oh wait, Ohio State they've played 6 games. Who have they played? Literally nobody except Indiana. Indiana went to overtime, right? Or no, they lost. They beat them in the last drive by a touchdown, and you look at this. There's not really an explanation for how, if Clemson beat Notre Dame and it wasn't like by 30 points, like let's say Clemson beats Notre Dame by 7 or 10 points, there's not really an explanation that they would even be able to give for why Ohio State would be able to jump Notre Dame.
I mean, that's definitely an interesting point there. I never thought about that. But also, I don't see in that case how Notre Dame could be left out. I really don't. I think it'd be so unfair for them to be left out. And coming as a Bama fan, I honestly probably think Notre Dame would be in over Alabama, because you think about this. If you flip the games, let's say Clemson beat Notre Dame in the regular season and Notre Dame beats Clemson in the ACC championship. Like, what if you flip the games? Does that make Notre Dame a bet just because they beat them in the second one? I think it's I think it's just, honestly, if they split, they both got to be in.
But also, Alabama is ahead of Notre Dame right now.
Well,
and if they both lose a conference champion, then like, what's to say Notre Dame should just jump Alabama because they both lost?
That's also a really good point,
because it was like if they both lose and one of them has to go, then
I think the easiest thing for the committee to say, which it didn't seem like this a couple of weeks ago, the easiest thing for them to do is just say Ohio State's out. They didn't play enough games in our opinion.
That's the easiest.
I think that would, if you put a room of a bunch of college football fans, you put them in a room and made them choose, I think it would probably be, in that case, Ohio State wins outright, Clemson beats Notre Dame, and Florida wins. I think it would be something like Clemson 1, Florida 2, Notre Dame 3, Alabama 4. So you get that Clemson-Alabama matchup.
I'd love to see
and that Florida-Notre Dame matchup.
I don't care if Notre Dame loses to Clemson and it still gets into the playoff, because I want to see Notre Dame Florida best. Top 3 offense in all of college football, in my humble opinion, versus the number 1 defense in all of college football.
Non-biased.
I think that would be like one of the most exciting matchups.
Well,
all season.
And we would also get like part 10 of Clemson versus Alabama.
And who doesn't love that matchup?
If Florida beats Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame, then those 4 teams have clearly distinguished themselves from everybody else, and Ohio State has done nothing to earn a spot.
I agree with you, and it would honestly,
let's make it happen.
It would be kind of an abomination if Alabama loses that one game versus Florida. That's how you're going to determine they don't deserve to make the playoff. I mean, what I mean?
And it'd be even more of an abomination if Notre Dame splits with Clemson.
Right, they split.
Yeah,
and
they literally
Clemson
split.
ends up in the 1 spot, and Notre Dame ends up out of the playoff. So I think
exactly that's the point I was making, and it's Ohio State, it's unfortunate for them, but you know what? They haven't
It's
proven it.
Their fault.
They
It's,
have
at
not.
the end of the day. I mean, it's not. I don't want to say it's their fault. It's the Big Ten's fault. So it's unfortunate, but they don't deserve it.
Yeah, I think that ends up coming down to scheduling and ultimately the fact that the Big Ten just isn't what it usually is. I mean, typically they're playing Penn State and they're playing Michigan, both of whom are top 15 teams, and they're winning those games, and they just clearly didn't have those opportunities this year because those teams are shockingly some of the
Terrible.
worst teams in the Big Ten. So,
And they
In
got
college
canceled.
football.
well, yeah, and they got canceled. So that'll pretty much wrap it up here on MBC's Sports Podcast, episode 15 of season 3. But we remind you, tomorrow night, 7:30, big time matchup down in Perry, Georgia, at the Panther Pit. Marist and Perry going at it for the quarterfinal matchups in 4A GHSA. Trip to the semifinals on the line. Going to be a fun one. Connell and I will be on the call. Whole crew's headed down after school tomorrow to Perry to cover the game. So make sure you tune in on the NFHS network live at 7:30, 7:10 for the pregame show with JP Eisenhower and Emmett Probst. But for now, signing off on behalf of JP, Connell, and Andrew Feeney, my name's Andrew Sulliver, saying so long. Go War Eagles. We'll see you tomorrow night from Perry, Georgia.